From fear to trembling. A further qualification should be added here. The solution is not to limit the market and private property by direct interventions of the state and state ownership. The domain of the state itself is also, in its own way, private. Private in the precise Kantian sense of the private use of reason in state administrative and ideological apparatuses. The public use of one's reason must always be free, and it alone can bring about enlightenment among men. The private use of one's reason, on the other hand, may often be very narrowly restricted without particularly hindering the progress of enlightenment. By public use of one's reason, I understand the use which a person makes of it as a scholar before the reading public. Private use I call that which one may make of it in a particular civil post or office which is entrusted to him. What one should add here, moving beyond Kant, is that there is a privileged social group which, on account of its lack of a determinate place in the private order of the social hierarchy, in other words, as a part of no part of the social body, directly stands for universality. It is only the reference to those excluded, to those who dwell in the blanks of the space of the state, that enables true universality. There is nothing more private than a state community which perceives the excluded as a threat and worries how to keep the excluded at a proper distance. In other words, as we have already seen, in the series of the four antagonisms, the one between the included and the excluded is the crucial one, the point of reference for the others. Without it, all others lose their subversive edge. Ecology turns into a problem of sustainable development, intellectual property into a complex legal challenge, biogenetics into an ethical issue. One can sincerely fight for ecology, defend a broader notion of intellectual property, oppose the copywriting of genes, while not questioning the antagonism between the included and the excluded. What is more, one can even formulate some of these struggles in terms of the included threatened by the polluting excluded. In this way, we get no true universality, only private concerns in the Kantian sense of the term. Corporations such as Whole Foods and Starbucks continue to enjoy favor among liberals, even though they both engage in anti-union activities. The trick is that they sell products that claim to be politically progressive acts, in and of themselves. One buys coffee made with beans bought from the growers at fair prices. One drives a hybrid vehicle. One buys from companies that provide good benefits for their employees, according to the corporation's own standards, and so on. Political action and consumption become fully merged. In short, without the antagonism between the included and the excluded, we may well find ourselves in a world in which Bill Gates is the greatest humanitarian fighting against poverty and diseases, and Rupert Murdoch the greatest environmentalist, mobilizing hundreds of millions through his media empire. And one should be clear at this point. The political expression of this radical antagonism, the way the pressure of the excluded is experienced within the established political space, always has a flavor of terror. The lesson is thus the one rendered long ago by Athena towards the end of Aeschylus's Eumenides. As for terror, don't banish it completely from the city. What mortal man is truly righteous without being afraid? Those who sense the fear revere what's right. With citizens like these, your country and your city will be safe, stronger than anything possessed by men. How are we to read these famous lines? Do they really point towards the manipulation of the politics of fear we know today? The first obstacle to such a reading is the obvious fact that Athena does not evoke the fear of an external enemy whose threat justifies the disciplined unity and possible defensive measures of the city-state. The fear is here the fear of divine justice itself, of its blinding authority, from the perspective of modern subjectivity, which is our perspective here. The object of this fear is the abyss of subjectivity itself, its terrifying power of self-relating negativity. It is the terrifying encounter of this dramatic core that Heidegger had in mind when he claimed that terror, Schrecken, was necessary if modern man was to be awakened from his metaphysico-technological slumber into a new beginning. We must principally concern ourselves with preparing for man the very basis and dimension upon which and within which something like a mystery of his dasein could once again be encountered. We should not be at all surprised if the contemporary man in the street feels disturbed, or perhaps sometimes dazed, and clutches all the more stubbornly at his idols when confronted with this challenge, and with the effort required to approach this mystery. It would be a mistake to expect anything else. We must first call for someone capable of instilling terror into our dasein again. Heidegger thus opposes wonder as the basic disposition of the first, Greek, beginning to terror, as the basic disposition of the second new beginning. In wonder, the basic disposition of the first beginning, beings first come to stand in their form. Terror, the basic disposition of the other beginning, reveals behind all progress and all domination over beings a dark emptiness of irrelevance. The thing to note here is that Heidegger uses the word terror and not anxiety. Hegel said something similar in his analysis of the master and servant, bondage, when he emphasized that since the bondsman is also a self-consciousness, the master is taken to be the essential reality for the state of bondage. Hence, for it, the truth is the independent consciousness existing for itself, although this truth is not taken yet as inherent in bondage itself. Still, it does in fact contain within itself this truth of pure negativity and self-existence, because it has experienced this reality within it. For this consciousness was not in peril and fear for this element or that, nor for this or that moment of time. It was afraid for its entire being. It felt the fear of death, the sovereign master. It had been in that experience melted to its inmost soul, has trembled throughout its every fibre, and all that was fixed and steadfast has quaked within it. This complete perturbation of its entire substance, this absolute dissolution of all its stability into fluent continuity is, however, the simple, ultimate nature of self-consciousness, absolute negativity, pure self-referent existence, which consequently is involved in this type of consciousness. This moment of pure self-existence is moreover a fact for it, for in the master it finds this as its object. Further, this bondsman's consciousness is not only this total dissolution in a general way. In serving and toiling, the bondsman actually carries this out. By serving, he cancels in every particular aspect his dependence on and attachment to natural existence, and by his work removes this existence away. The servant is thus in himself already free, his freedom being embodied outside himself in his master. It is in this sense that Christ is our master and simultaneously the source of our freedom. Christ's sacrifice set us free. How? Neither as the payment for our sins, nor as legalistic ransom, but as when we are afraid of something, and fear of death is the ultimate fear that makes us slaves. And a true friend says, "Don't be afraid. Look, I will do it. What are you so afraid of? I will do it not because I have to, but out of my love for you. I am not afraid." He does it, and in this way sets us free, demonstrating in Act 2 that it can be done, that we too can do it, that we are not slaves. Recall from Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead the description of the momentary impact Howard Rourke makes on the members of the audience in the courtroom where he is standing trial. Rourke stood before them, as each man stands in the innocence of his own mind. But Rourke stood like that before a hostile crowd, and they knew suddenly that no hatred was possible to him. For the flash of an instant they grasped the manner of his consciousness. Each asked himself, "Do I need anyone's approval? Does it matter? Am I tied?" And for that instant each man was free, free enough to feel benevolence for every other man in the room. It was only a moment, the moment of silence when Rourke was about to speak. This is the way Christ brings freedom. When confronting him, we become aware of our own freedom, and does not, mutatis mutandis, the same hold for Che Guevara. The photo showing him under arrest in Bolivia, surrounded by government soldiers, have a weird Christological aura, as if we see a tired but defiant Christ on his way to crucifixion. No wonder that, when, moments prior to his death, the executioner's pistol already aimed at him, the hand holding it trembling, Guevara looked at him and said, "Aim well, you are about to kill a man." His version of Ecce Homo. And indeed, is the basic message of Guevara not precisely this, the message of how, in and through all his failures, he persisted? He went on. One can imagine him thinking in the desperate last days in Bolivia a version of the last words of Samuel Beckett's The Unnameable. In the silence you don't know, you must go on. I cannot go on. I'll go on. In an unsurpassable irony of history, after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, everything he did was a failure. The dismal failure of his economic policies as the Cuban Minister of Economy. After a year, food had to be rationed. The failure of his Congo adventure, the failure of his last mission in Bolivia. However, all these human, all too human failures somehow fade into the background, the backdrop against which the contours of his properly overhuman, or why not inhuman, figure appear, confirming Badiou's motto that the only way to be truly human is to exceed ordinary humanity, tending towards the dimension of the inhuman.